Hi, my name is Adrian Zahra. I'm a QP and a Senior Quality Director for Glenmark Pharmaceuticals in Europe. And today I've chosen the topic QP and GMDP, challenges for MA holders, importers and release sites after Brexit. So in terms of my presentation today, I'd like to make it clear that I am not representing Glenmark's views. These are purely my personal views as a QP. I've had about 22 years of experience working in various fields across several European countries, including the UK, in batch release and also in quality control. So it's been a very, very interesting, fascinating 3 months or so. A lot of news coming hard and fast. We now have a smaller number of scenarios that are a distinct possibility, although nothing is still very clear. But many of the participants in the political and technical discussions seem to agree that this will definitely be a Brexit, so the UK will no longer be a member of the European Union, although not many people are in agreement as to what Brexit will look like. Ultimately, we do have 3 possible models, and in order to keep the talk to the point, I focused on the most likely scenario. So I consider the possibility of an EEA single market model, such as is shared with Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein. But that seems increasingly unlikely because of the British insistence on the limitation of movement across the single market. So it seems like at best it will be something similar to a mutual recognition agreement access to the single market, which is desired by most business owners. So similarly as is shared by Switzerland, Japan, Canada, Australia and New Zealand and Israel. There is a concern that there may not be enough time to negotiate this. However, I believe that this is probably the most likely scenario because Britain is negotiating from a position of strength because it is already within the European Union, so all it needs to negotiate, strictly speaking, would be the opt-outs. The other alternative is not very suitable for most of the pharmaceutical industry because it is essentially a customs union. So some goods, probably including pharmaceuticals, but no services. This is the type of agreement which countries like Turkey, Andorra, Monaco, Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man and the British bases in Cyprus have. This is relatively simple and quick, so it could be a solution of last resort. In terms of timing, provided that the most quoted scenario of the announcement being around end quarter one or end of 2017, that means Brexit would happen somewhere around the end of 2019. In terms of QPs, our role would definitely have to be redimensioned since there would be no more releases occurring from the UK into Europe or the EEA without them having to be redone in Europe. So that obviously reduces the attraction for companies to take that model. Similarly to the Swiss model, what we can probably foresee, there will be a requirement for at least administrative release of all batches imported into Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I don't believe that the UK would want to set up a separate system of release because the QP model has been proven in many cases as being the right model for pharmaceuticals, at least in our scenario. There might be less opportunities for work in multinational supply chains and possibly more opportunities to work for local and national releases. This is starting to become more likely as American and Japanese multinationals consider whether to move their headquarters to Europe, as they have threatened. Obviously, we're not sure of any of this, so a lot of the information has been collected from a review of the technical literature. A lot depends on the success or failure of the national efforts to bring back manufacture into the UK. So it is obviously not necessary to be in Europe in order to create a very productive, very efficient manufacturing infrastructure. Plenty of countries have that outside the European context. So long as the UK counterbalances its lack of connectivity to the single market with an increase in productivity and efficiency related to manufacture, that would probably help QPs keep their very significant role as the controllers of the supply chain. So there may be a global shake-up, a global rebalancing of the industry, with some industries moving onshore onto continental Europe and some industries coming offshore into the UK. Whatever it is, what we can say is that the QPs will still be highly valued. They're the most experienced, most qualified pharmaceutical experts, both from MHRA side and also as employers. It is possible to countenance that QPs will be perhaps more valued now in terms of their influence and suggestions and consultancy in terms of design of quality systems, whereas because of the heavy load of releasing into Europe before, most of the experienced QPs were tied up with supply chain audits, especially in recent years. What is of concern to me, as I guess many other QPs, is the fact that in this current discussion we are probably the only stakeholder group with no official representation. Our role changes from context to context depending on which industry we work for. So let's start with considering the MA holders, importers, and wholesalers. The number of new MAs may drop dramatically after Brexit has taken effect, since UK may no longer be sought after as a reference member state. It is again difficult to understand which model MHRA will adopt, as they are keeping very reticent aspect in terms of how they foresee their role as part of a greater European network. This clearly depends on the negotiations. However, what we can see is that many companies at the moment are taking a business as usual approach. So the number of MAs will still continue right up until it is clear what will be the scenario. In an EEA type scenario, obviously the UK would be still part of the medicines approval network as a concerned member state. Currently, around 25% of pharmaceutical production from the UK goes to the EU, and nothing much is expected to happen to that. It would cost too much, and it would be unnecessary to make significant changes to those pharmaceuticals. Obviously, if no new pharmaceutical registrations come in, that figure would gradually drop over time. The European Medicines Agency and potentially multinational headquarters which have come to be based around the southeast and London area in order to be close to the European Medicines Agency and its direction, these may move to new European locations. So These co-locations, as I call them, bring clustering activity, highly technical regulatory affairs, R&D expertise, and I think QPs would, unless they do form part of this cluster and devise new ways of connectivity, of working with these people in different territories, I think there may be a loss of this expertise which QPs rely on. Technical agreements and service supply contracts will clearly have to be rewritten due to post-Brexit changes, whichever way that goes. And this will also be part of the game plan of many companies as they consider what to do in the light of the various scenarios as they play out. The parallel importation industry, in a clear hard Brexit scenario, will probably die a slow natural death as the connection between the medicines control environment in the EU and outside the EU will change. Again, provided that an EEA type of agreement is kept, this may not be the case. It is possible to also envisage that there will be fewer takeovers and mergers as a result of Brexit. Clearly the UK, though a large and significant market, would not hold any major attractions for large companies trying to increase their size, because the size would still be located in a single market. There may be local interest in increasing the magnitude of the companies. However, the attraction will not be there because of the restrictions posed by the competitions authority. Because a larger percentage of a smaller market is much easier to reach, and many companies are already at that size in the UK market. So the demand for more QPs, could this possibly drop slowly over time? Would this lead to the scaling as it becomes a less attractive option? These are all things which need to be analyzed. In terms of service providers to the supply chain, this is where a lot of contract QPs are employed in release sites, performing audits or providing consultancy to small and medium-sized companies. The activity here is not expected to decrease. If anything, it may need to increase because of the changes to the supply chain. So losses would probably be made up from formerly EU-located services being transferred in-house. Again, here we're envisaging possibly different approaches to laboratory testing and quality control. The UK has a very strong laboratory sector, and these are all things which need to be considered. US and Japanese companies may still shift services to facilities in Europe. This cannot be prevented because most of these companies are multinational, and their bases in the UK are mainly logistical or R&D bases, and they are business clusters located here primarily due to the interest shown in the MHRA's close relationship with the FDA and the EMA. The EMA will definitely move, and the MHRA, which has loaned a lot of its expertise to the EMA, stands to lose that expertise or else face a financial challenge to try and build up that expertise once more. It is, however, expected that the R&D biotech clusters around the major universities in the UK will be retained, and QPs will continue to benefit from the opportunities these spin-off companies offer in terms of innovation and startup activity. Contractors operating for European companies, so these are people who are based in the UK and perform services for companies in Europe. There are some companies which apply strict work permit restrictions for non-EU members, and this would obviously impact heavily on QPs. However, this sector is still expected to grow because the QP as such, in terms of qualifications and experience, it's difficult to envisage a work permit system which could successfully keep out a QP. QP API GMP certification and audits may suffer unless as part of transnational partnerships and cooperation. If the MHRA is operating a similar system to the EU system on its own, the burden on QPs may grow if the EU does not recognize other QPs work from outside the UK, and vice versa. So this is a very beneficial area of the QP's work, and any impact on this would be worrying. In terms of interaction with the regulator, again, the QPs are not usually involved directly, but they may be involved at higher levels of organizations, and they also contribute to the technical input to that interaction. So the European Medicines Authority will definitely move away from London, and the lobbying for this has already started by several countries. Will the working language of the Medicines Authority change? I don't think so, because English is the language of the pharmaceutical industry, has always been. However, that is potentially a concern. The MHRA faces an existential crisis as it withdraws from pivotal roles, chairing key committees and influencing European pharma policy. It has always taken a very leading role within Europe, and many ex-QPs have found senior roles within MHRA. Its latest position, as listed on the website, is that it will try to provide the full range of services to both the industry and the public, with less resources and the potential for burden sharing. In one of its statements, it compared one of the potential models as being an FDA model. However, there is a big difference between the UK market and the US domestic market, and I'm not really that sure that with funding restrictions the MHRA would be able to deliver all these services. The QP faces potentially complex interactions with the agency initially, as government policy tries to balance out the EU trade against US, Commonwealth and China. So we're looking at potentially country-specific trade negotiations, which will lead to very specific requirements for individual countries. So the QP's job in terms of releases for domestic use when dealing with imports directly from these countries becomes much more complex, and it is, I think, reasonable to assume that each country would try to negotiate as much of a good deal as possible for its domestic pharmaceutical industry as well. The UK, I think it's safe to assume, will still be part of the PICS, so we don't think that there will be any major GMP changes to be expected. However, will the UK still have a seat at the International Conference on Harmonization, ICH? That is still to be seen. Of course, there's nothing to stop the UK and the MHRA specifically to look for partnerships with EU agencies, and this could also help to reduce the risk of complex interactions when it comes to individual EU countries. In terms of recruitment and professional development of the sector, which I will now turn to, the UK has obviously become less attractive to EU QPs in the interim as a result, because many people now thinking of coming to the UK for a future career would be looking at things like pension systems or transferability of their work experience and qualifications. So again, unless these things become very clear very soon, the EU QP population, as I put it, would think again as to whether the UK is an attractive option, and this can exacerbate the difficulty in finding QPs in the short term. The UK pharma industry will probably reorient towards global export of pharma products, so this creates a more complex environment with multiple sets of regulations. Again, this makes it more daunting for new QPs coming into the field, because it will probably take them longer before they feel comfortable in starting up on their own or sitting for the QP exam. The QP role changes focus away from market release. If it does so, it will require roughly the same number of QPs at present. We don't think that any of the changes, although complex, will affect the number of QPs or force any QPs to withdraw from the field. So whilst it makes it more difficult for EU QPs to come in and fill gaps, it should not discourage any younger pharmacists or biologists or chemists who would like this to enter this career. Contract jobs may, however, become less lucrative if European releases cannot be done, because the quantity and the quality of the contracts available may suffer. So again, this could create a downside, a negative to people considering becoming QPs. There may be difficulty in sourcing lower salaried, lower ranking support staff because there's a lot of these people who are coming from European, particularly Eastern European companies at the moment. However, again, so long as the UK balances this out by an influx of non-EU personnel, there shouldn't be any significant impact on this sector. So, recapitulating, what does the future hold? There's definitely going to be a lot of uncertainty, fluidity, and transitional arrangements in place until Article 50 has been triggered. We are seeing some movement in that direction already, with many EU meetings already not being attended by the UK at a high level. So there is an element of risk for the UK market there. There will be slightly less uncertainty, a lot more work to do, and changes to the QMS which need to be made once Article 50 is triggered, because then the clock starts ticking and we have 2 years to finish the job. Many technical agreements will take a long time. Supply chains may need to be refined, transportation routes reevaluated, qualified. There will be business continuity initiatives in respect of infrastructure which needs to be moved from the UK to the EU and vice versa. So there will be definitely a lot of work for QPs there. The world as the UK QP knows it will definitely change, but every cloud has a silver lining, as we say, and there will be some threats, but there will also be new opportunities. As a sector, the QP is well positioned to take advantage of the opportunities offered by change. Threats create problems for companies, but they also create opportunities for others, especially companies which act as disruptors and do not rely on their past success to justify their future existence. The important thing is to plan for the unexpected, keep options open for as long as possible. In terms of conclusions and recommendations I would make, I would say to the politicians, we should ensure that the QPs are represented strongly on technical discussions with industry, not necessarily as part of the industry negotiating teams, but also as professionals, because they have a lot to contribute. Industry surveys are required by government and the MHRA to establish company by company, sector by sector, if necessary, what impact Brexit will have once it is defined, once the UK negotiating position is defined, and to identify ways of compensating for this. A manpower resource planning study should be carried out by the farm industry to ensure that it will have enough QPs, that they are well positioned within organograms, and that they are ready for the future. QPs will need to take on a more authoritative stance within companies, utilize their expertise as internal consultants, especially in this time of uncertainty, and escalate their concerns to top management to ensure that the industry is well prepared for post-Brexit turbulence. And finally, MHRA should consider innovative ways such as partnerships, automatic recognition for products and services licensed in the EU, burden sharing arrangements to keep alive contacts and influence within the European Medicines Authority and the EU Directorate General for Consumer and Health Affairs. I've also provided a set of references with this presentation which will indicate to the viewer where essentially I have based my opinions on. Thank you for your attention and good luck with Brexit.